Hello, I'm James, the grumpy petrolhead. Why did we buy this 1926 Rolls-Royce 20? Why would anyone buy a 1920s Rolls-Royce? And what's it like to own and drive and live with a car like this? Well, today we're going to find out. Cheerio! Crikey, it's cold today. Why did we buy this car? Well, we previously had a 1920s car. Well, we still do. A 1926 Standard. Now that car has a 4-cylinder 2-litre overhead valve engine, and it will cruise comfortably at 40 to 45 miles per hour, assuming the road is flat. And we actually took that car on a little adventure around France. But what we found was that when we had to cross a motorway or go on a dual carriageway, obviously we try to avoid those situations, but often there are times when you have to do at least 1 or 2 junctions to get to where you're going. But that car on the motorway, it was frightening. When you're trundling along at 40 miles an hour and the Arctic lorries are overtaking you, it's a bit worrying. And also, if you're doing 40 to 45 on the motorway, you're not sure that the cars coming up to you from behind realise how slow you're going. So we got to thinking we need another 20s car, but something with a bit more power. So we had a look around and we found this car. Now the Rolls-Royce 20 has a 6-cylinder, just over 3-litre engine. And in this car we can comfortably cruise at 50 to 55 miles an hour, which is a lot better. And also, the car being quite a bit bigger than the Standard, it has a lot more road presence on the road. So you just feel a little bit safer. So that's really why we bought this car. Hasn't gotten any warmer. Good grief. Another reason why we like 1920s cars, they're very involving. I like to do my own maintenance, and where I can I like to do my own repairs, and we've had to do a few repairs on this car, but for me that's all part of the fun. In fact, we've only had, I think we've had this car 7 or 8 years. We've only had 1 breakdown, and luckily we were near a friend's house, and what happened was a valve spring broke, but the valve being straight over the piston dropped, hit the piston and was pushed back into the valve guide while bending it, and that's where it stayed. So fortunately we were able to drive the car to our friend's house, and sadly had to get it trailered home. But fortunately, when I took the rocker cover off, I found all the bits of the spring, so I know that there was no bits down in the engine. But luckily, the parts for this car are actually quite easy to get hold of, often next day delivery. And that's something a lot of people ask about the car when they see us out and about. They say, or they ask, what's it like to get parts for an old car like this? Well, actually, it's pretty easy. I managed to get a set of valve springs, a new valve and a valve guide and a head gasket, all next day delivery. I mean, that's amazing, isn't it? Also, shortly after buying this car, we changed all the tyres. They weren't worn out, they were just starting to perish. So we bought a set of tyres, Broccoli tyres, from a Vintage Tyre supply. Again, next day delivery. Now, I used to work for a tyre company and I fitted many tyres in my time. So I fitted these. They were trickier than I thought. Now, these wheels have split rims. Now, the idea is you take the outer rim off the wheel and the tyre simply slides off. And then you simply slide the new tyre and tube on and replace this metal ring. It's easier said than done, believe me. Talking about breakdowns, we nearly had a fail to start. I was going to start filming this a couple of days ago, but the car didn't want to start. Let me show you. First, I'm going to open the bonnet. We have to turn the young lady so we don't whack her. There we go. Now the ignition system on this car is a little bit unusual for its time. Well, the standard parts are, we have a distributor with the points inside and an ignition coil. So that's all fairly standard. This, incidentally, is the original ignition coil. But what Rolls-Royce did, instead of having 12 volts going into the ignition coil, they figured that the coil would last longer, it wouldn't get so hot, by having 12 volts going to the coil. Here, the car has a ballast resistor. So what that does is it drops the voltage from 12 volts down to about 4. Now, sometime in the distant past, this coil has failed, although I do believe they're rebuildable, so that's something I might get done one day. It'd be nice to get that back into use. And somebody has put on a modern ignition coil. Now, this ignition coil doesn't use a ballast resistor. It accepts 12 volts. So the ballast resistor here has simply been bypassed. Now, if your car doesn't start because of a coil issue or a flat battery, Rolls-Royce has a secret weapon. I'll show you. Now, around here at the other side of the engine, we see a magneto. Now, this magneto you can bring into play should you have a flat battery or a dodgy coil. So you have the high tension lead here going all the way around the engine. Here we are, back at the other side. So the magneto high tension lead comes around the engine, around here, and it sits dormant in here until you need it. So what we do to engage it, we release the high tension lead from the coil, and then we simply put in the high tension lead from the magneto. We also have to take a fuse out in the fuse box so that we don't have this thing live. And that way you can start the car without a battery, and you can also start the car ha! There we go. Start the car with the starter handle. I have tried, hurt my back doing it. So initially, when the car wouldn't start, but it would start on the magneto. So I assumed it must be the coil that's at fault. So I went out and bought myself a new coil. I did test the two coils, a new one against the old one, and I did find that the old one had half the resistance on the primary Good grief. Had half the resistance on the primary windings. I'm so cold. So I thought, yeah, it's got to be the coil. So you can imagine my disappointment after I'd fitted the new coil and it still wouldn't start. So, feeling a little bit dejected by that. Dejected? Yeah, I think that's right. I thought, well, I must be missing something here. So I went and had a cup of tea, had a think about it. Then I realised that the magneto has its own set of points. So I figured it might be the points in the distributor. And I checked them and they were too wide. So I adjusted them back to the correct gap. Car started fine. Oh well, you live and learn, don't you? So I'd like to show you how we start this car, which is a bit of an involved procedure, and it's not a quick getaway car. You'll see why. So firstly, we connect the battery, then we walk round the car. Remember to turn the lady. Next, we turn the fuel on, which is here. This is a autovac, by the way. It's a small petrol tank, and the vacuum from the engine sucks up the fuel from the back of the car to keep this topped up. So the fuel's on. Okay. Rolls-Royce made their own carburetors, and the carburetor doesn't have a choke as such. It has a little starting carburetor here, which you use on a cold day. And also, if you undo this little cap, which is on the top of the float chamber, and pull this little lever up like this, you can flood the carburetor. My hands are so cold I can't put this back on. Okay, so we flooded the carburetor. So now we're in the car. First thing we have to do is turn on the starting carburetor, which is this lever here. That engages the starting carburetor. Then we have to turn on the ignition. Then we have to retard the ignition, and usually to start I drop the throttle down a little bit. This is a manual throttle. It's the same. We do have a throttle down here as well as normal. And the next thing, I don't know if you can see down here, there is the starter pedal. So let's give it a go and let's start the car. What a freezing day to try and make a YouTube video in an open top car. Off we go. We have a 4-speed gearbox, and the gearbox is a crash gearbox, no synchromesh. Oh, nice gear change there. So if anyone that hasn't driven a non-synchromesh or crash gearbox before, what you need to do is when you change gear, like I'm going to demonstrate, clutch in, into neutral, clutch out, then in, and then into fourth. So that's called doubling the clutch. I'm making sure, or trying to get the engine revs to match the gearbox revs so that the gears mesh quietly. So it takes a little bit of skill to do, and oh, I've got a rattle. I'm just going to have a look for. I'll check out any rattles. Might be a second. Ah, ha, ha. Okay, so I fixed the rattle. Always like to check when I've got a rattle. It was actually this little button here. This one's loose as well. That holds the split windscreen shut. On a hot summer's day, you can swing open this top half of the windshield. Shan't be doing that today. Okay, so I dropped the revs a little bit here to get it into first gear. There we are. Now I tend to drop the revs on my little tick over adjuster here when I'm going up the gearbox. Look at that. And that way I get a smooth gear change. Now as I come to this junction here, I've upped the revs a little bit, make sure I don't stall. Oh, a bit of wheel spin there. Well, here we are. Fourth gear. Lovely. Now the car is quite forgiving. It's got quite a torquey engine, so you don't have to change gear too much. And I find that's the secret of driving an old car with a crash gearbox, is to try not to change gear. But this engine is very smooth. It's really quite a pleasant experience. The steering's lovely. It's nicely weighted when you're driving along. Of course, with no power steering, when you're trying to park, it's a little bit of an effort. But again, you find little ways of dealing with it. For example, I never move the steering wheel unless the car's actually moving. That makes a big difference. The brakes, which I should demonstrate, are actually quite good. So I'm going to indicate here. Are you indicating with my arm? I'm going to pull over here and adjust the camera. So the brakes, drum brakes all round, so it's got four-wheel braking, but the front brakes only come on when the rear wheels are turning, which is a bit confusing if you get it MOT'd. It's like a mechanical servo, and as it speeds up, it comes outwards, throws outwards, and engages the front wheel brakes, which work reasonably well for the age of the car. And we're off. we're driving now is through what's left of the Kimbolton World War II airbase. It was known as the Ace of Spades, and it was initially a British airfield, and as the war started it was taken over by the Americans and became quite an important World War II American airbase. You can see some of the concrete for the service roads is still here, but it's an industrial estate now. This really is a delightful car to drive. It's smooth, and the controls feel nice. Quite a responsive steering, quite direct steering. There's not too much slop in this car, in the steering of this car. It does seem to hold the road quite well, but of course we're not really going very fast. Now we're coming down a hill now, so hopefully we can show you how nice the brakes are. Yeah, they feel pretty good. Obviously we've got no anti-lock brakes, so emergency braking is a balance between slowing down and not sliding the wheels. But the trick is to think well ahead. Try and anticipate everything so that you don't have to do an emergency brake. Now I'm gonna just leave it in third here because we're still moving. The car hasn't stopped. If there was a car coming at that junction and I had to stop, I would have probably gone into second and taken off in second. That's a funny thing when you're driving along and somebody's cutting the grass or some builder's hammering away or something, and you hear a noise. It always makes you worried about the car. What's wrong with my car? What's that noise? Oh my God. Hopefully if we see somebody, we can give them a good klaxon. See somebody that we know. Big bump. Ooh! No problem for a Rolls-Royce. Made it. I was getting petrol the other day, and while I was paying, this lady came over to me and with a little boy, and she said, "Go and ask him." So the little boy looked up at me and said, "Excuse me, mister, can your car fly?" I said, "No, only Chitty Chitty Bang Bang can fly." Isn't that nice? But that's typical of the sort of comments you get going out and about in the car. People want to know about it, they want to ask about it, and it's I always find it enjoyable to tell them about the car, and it does seem to put a smile on people's faces. So overall, owning this car has been very satisfying, and one of the reasons is to service it and maintain it myself is a satisfying endeavour, and also just to make little occasions special, just going to the pub and or just going out for a drive really. And it's nice to be involved in car events and go to car clubs in it. One of the things about owning an old car like this is thinking about the history of the car. It's 99 years old, and we're very fortunate with this car to have a lot of its history. There's a lot to talk about in what this car's been through, so we're going to do that in a future video, so hopefully you can join us for that. If you have an old car from the 20s, please let us know in the comments what you like about it, and what you find satisfying about owning the car, and maybe what you don't find satisfying about owning the car. But please let us know and share your thoughts. That'd be great to hear from you. Cheers. Well, I do hope you've enjoyed our latest episode on the Grumpy Petrolhead. Next week, we're going to talk about this car, another car from 1926, and our first vintage car. And this car has a story to tell. So please stick around, and we'll see you next time. Cheerio.